But a warm welcome here to Unicorner. My name is Annika Damström, and I'll be the moderator of today's event. This is, of course, an official side event of Slush organized by the University of Helsinki, and I think this is a beautiful space that, well, kind of is very Finnish in its atmosphere, and also what I hear is a very, very popular space for the university to host various kinds of events. So today we're going to discuss innovations. We're going to discuss their importance, how to make them successful, and how to make them especially commercially successful, and what the connection to the university is. That's the big question. Universities obviously have an important role in society in various kinds of impacts, not only in research and teaching, but innovations more and more. And the question is, how could this impact be even bigger? A few practical notes before we continue. We have some case examples of spinouts that come from the University of Helsinki, and you find them on the sides of this space. So do go and say hello to these people. We're also going to see some cases up here on stage, so they're going to come here and say hello. And there's a buffet behind this space at the Fenster space. And as the University of Helsinki is climate conscious, all the food is vegan. Downstairs, you're going to find a counter where you can book some space for private meetings if you should wish so. Also, the restrooms are downstairs and upstairs, and if you wish to use an elevator, that's possible too. The hashtag we're using for this event is Unicorner, so please be active. You also get a chance to ask questions and comment during our panel discussion today. Also, I'd like to say hi to the people over there who are following the stream. A warm welcome to you as well to this event, and I hope you'll be with us through the whole thing. But that's enough for me. For now, let's welcome the Rector of the University of Helsinki, Professor Jari Niemelä, up here to say the official welcoming words. Jari, please.
Dear friends, welcome to Think Corner, and welcome all of you behind the screens over there somewhere across the world. What now follows is a typical Finnish academic speech of 45 minutes. No, don't worry, this is much shorter than that. As we all know, humankind is facing unprecedented challenges, but also opportunities. The future of our world relies on high-quality research and education. And that's exactly what we do every day here at the University of Helsinki. Our scientific discoveries help solve global challenges, but science itself needs help. It needs investors who can help turn scientific discoveries into an innovation that becomes a business and reaches global markets. Only then can a solution have a real impact in the world. We are here tonight to discuss how to increase the impact of research-based startups in the society. For a multidisciplinary university such as ours, it's very important that all the disciplines, and in particular their combinations, are given support to produce marketable innovations. At the University of Helsinki, we invest in helping researchers to commercialize their ideas. Without a commercial interest, even the most interesting innovations fail to reach their full potential, never fully benefiting the society. The experts at Helsinki Innovation Services, HIS, work with researchers in putting spinout teams together and in developing innovations into investable spinout companies. Tonight we have 8 examples here at Think Corner of such companies, and more can be seen at our stand at Slush. I'm particularly happy to see so many international investors in the audience tonight, and I do hope that you will find discussions with our teams here and at the Slush fruitful. Dear friends, we should continuously scan the world for best practices and successful models for the commercialization of research results. Exciting models of partnerships between universities and investors have emerged in recent years. For instance, Oxford Science Innovation, a £600 million fund, invests in Oxford University spinouts. We would like to have something similar here. I'm sure that we will hear and learn more about similar good examples from our international speakers tonight. Innovations spinning out from universities are at the very early stage, and often public funding is also needed to take them closer to market-driven investors. We do have exciting public financing tools, but there is still much to do in order to help ideas and inventions to come out of research laboratories. Therefore, we should look into new partnerships involving all the parties now present here in the Unicorner: universities, public sector funders, and private sector investors. Finally, I would like to thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very much looking forward to stimulating discussions on these topics. These discussions are really needed in order for us to be able to change the world and make it a better place for all of us. So, cheers and have a good, interesting evening.
Thank you so much, Rector Jari Niemelä. And now we're going to get to see something which this is all about. I mean, 4 case examples of innovations that have sprung from the University of Helsinki, and representatives of these cases will come and say hello to the stage. So let's see.
Hyperspectral imaging gives us and computers the power to see the full spectrum of light. We've created a passive device combined with artificial intelligence that lets any smartphone user capture hyperspectral images. You'll be able to create computer vision applications that we've never seen before, cheaper than before. Soon, you'll have the power to see the full spectrum of light.
Hi, my name is Mikko Toivonen. I'm from Spexel. We are over there, so do please come and talk to us. Thank you.
Over 400 million diabetics need to measure their blood sugar every day. Unfortunately, even as of today, measuring blood sugar requires using needles. At Glucomodicum, we have developed and tested in clinical trials in type 2 diabetics a first-of-its-kind solution to measure glucose without using needles. Our solution is based on a patented technology that can also be used to measure multiple other analytes. At the moment, we are in ongoing collaboration with major global players to take this product to the market.
Hello, I am Alejandro Garcia, CTO and co-founder of Glucomodicum. If you want to know a bit more about our technology, please welcome to visit our stand.
We have a tailor-made solution for every patient to destroy cancer. We use our novel cancer treatment called PeptiGrad. The treatment is highly flexible and adapting to each patient's individual cancer. PeptiGrad activates the immune system to detect and destroy cancer cells everywhere in the body. We will start clinical testing next year, and we are currently looking for partners and investors.
Good evening, my name is Jari and I work at Valo Therapeutics. Please come and check out our novel cancer treatments just around the corner. Thank you.
Hay Schools was born as a response to enormous demand for Finnish education model globally. Our major innovation is a scalable early education model that could be easily put into practice outside from Finland. We provide a complete licensing package for local early education operators. It includes detailed curriculum materials, teacher training, learning environment design, curated learning materials, and operational support. Currently, we have 8 Hay Schools open in China, Korea, Australia, and Finland, and around 10 more in preparation phase. We think that the smallest children deserve the best teachers.
Hi everyone, my name is Annika and I'm from Hay Schools. We are over there in the right corner, so it would be lovely to say hi to you and tell you more about our product. Thanks.
Well, even if the presentations were short, I have to say, wow, for myself. I mean, these are potentially world-changing innovations. I'm sure you agree with me. So please do go say hello to them and discuss what they're doing further. But now I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker. She's Rebeca Hwang. She's the co-founder and managing director of Kalei Ventures, and she's going to talk about the role of venture capital and global collaborative networks in turning groundbreaking research into novel applications. And she'll also be participating in our panel, so you'll be able to ask her maybe some questions as well. But let's get her on stage first and give her a speech. Rebeca.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, good evening. I'm so delighted to be here today. I have to say, Slush in the middle of winter, I thought this is going to be really scary and cold, but feeling the warmth here in this room and knowing that 25,000 people are coming to this conference has made the experience so far absolutely amazing. So, as the presenter said today we're going to be talking about the role of networks and capital as catalyzers to take ideas from the lab into impact both in terms of social impact as well as economic impact. I know what some of you are feeling. You're thinking, another talk about money, another talk about networking. This is not your idea of a fun evening, right? For those of us who are coming from academia. And that's why you got your alcohol first, so this is more bearable. But also, you know that all of you are standing, so we have to make this fun and interactive and lively. Otherwise, there's a biological clock here that I'm facing of you getting tired of standing. So we'll make this very fun. It will be mostly stories from Silicon Valley and around the world, and part of my life story too, on how I started off as an academic, as an inventor, and life took me to become more of an entrepreneur and an investor later on. So I'll tell you about that journey. All right, so first I'll take you back to 2013. This is the year that was the 10th anniversary of my graduation from my alma mater, MIT. So when I was a chemical engineering student there was this list called the MIT Tech Reviews 35 Under 35. It listed 35 innovators that MIT deemed to be promising for the future, and they had to be young, because, for the future, you had to start young, under 35. And so this was sort of the list that I always expected every year. I looked at the announcement of these 35 people, because very quickly, they would become my role models and my life heroes. For me, a nerd, this was like watching the Oscars. Every year, I was really thrilled to see this list. And to explain why I was so excited, I have to tell you more about my background. When I was a kid, I was very much rooted in this acknowledgement that I was a nerd, and I was proud to be. How many of you guys identify yourselves as a science nerd or a tech person? Come on, be proud. Great. So when I moved from Korea, where I was born, to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, we went to the other side of the world, and I spoke no Spanish. So I went to school, I couldn't communicate, and the only way that I could talk to people and make friends was by sharing my math homework. So that's how I became very much proud and identified with a sense of, being a nerd and a geek are good things. And those were my first social experiences in life, to be able to communicate through the language of science and math. Later on, in high school, my life dream was to become a scientist that devoted her life to knowledge creation. My life hero was Marie Curie. And as you know, she's one of the most prolific and instrumental, really impressive female scientists in history. And I find it so cool that she devoted her entire life to the creation of new knowledge, and that even she sacrificed her own life for the creation of new scientific truth. In fact, I thought it would be such a worthwhile use of my life to die for science, just like Marie Curie had done back in her time. Now, well, I'm going to turn 40 this year, so I'm much closer to death than I was in high school. So now I changed my mind. I don't think it's so cool to die for science anymore. But definitely, that was something that I considered to be really, really cool, as the devotion and dedication of your time and resources into creating this type of knowledge. And later on, I went to MIT. That was the year that Good Will Hunting was released. Do you remember the movie with Matt Damon? And I thought back then that at MIT, even the janitors were solving math theorems at night because of what the movie showed. And so I was really excited to go there. And what was really nice about that environment was that everybody there was really into creating something just for the mere reason that nobody had done it before. So you go into the hallways and the labs, and people would be tinkering and building stuff, and you would ask them, why are you doing this? What is the utility of this? And they would say, there has to be no value. I'm building this, I'm creating this, because it's never been done before. And that was reason enough. So you could imagine when, in 2013, I see the list of the 35, under 35, and all of a sudden, my name is on there. So this list that I was just so in admiration of, I started reading, and it included people like Matt Rogers, who was the creator of Nest, which was sold to Google for $2 billion. And he invented, with Tony Fadell, who was the creator of the iPod, a smart thermostat. There was another person there whose name was Christine, and she created this imaging technology that allowed you to detect heart disease early on. And there was the inventor of the smartwatch, and I went down the list, and then I saw my name. I was just so excited to see that. And what I was more excited about was to see the caption next to my name. So what was the contribution I was doing to science and technology that MIT was recognizing? And then I read this. So next to my name, it said, many innovations can't happen without the right connections. And basically, what it meant was that my contribution to science and technology was networking. And as a science sort of techie, for me, that was the worst insult. You can't give me a prize in science and technology for networking, right? That was in the bottom of the pyramid in our caste system at MIT. So it took me a number of years to really understand what this meant and the role of these networks in amplifying and enabling a really amazing positive impact and footprint in the world. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, how these networks can help you, universities, and ideas to see the light of day. So I actually went to Stanford and studied social network theory. I wanted to scientifically understand the role of these networks in affecting performance of organizations. The problem that I was trying to solve was there are these organizations in Argentina, in the shanty towns around Buenos Aires, that were able to serve water in pipe systems to families that didn't even have roofs or walls. So very, very poor families who couldn't afford the basics, but yet, as you see in the picture, they had a pipe system of water going into their homes. So I was very curious, how could these organizations that were water cooperatives able to create a water service for these very poor families and make it and do it profitably? It turns out that it was all about their networks. The networks between the individuals in these organizations and the networks between the organizations themselves allow them to create knowledge sharing and pooling of resources that enabled the creation of this service that was so difficult to do, even by giant companies like Suez. And so I went on and decided to embark on an entrepreneurial career myself. We created a company called UNoodle, which is a network, a platform for networks, where scientists and entrepreneurs could connect with corporations and governments to create companies. One example of a company that came out of this network is called Power Glove. And so what they did was enhance the ability of users and workers in the automobile industry by using this sensor technology that they wore on the glove. This was technology that was created at the University of Munich, the TUM, Technical University. And through the network, they were able to join a program called the Intel Wearable Challenge. They won some prizes there, and soon after, they raised $40 million to bring this technology to market. So what's interesting about this is the timeline of how some of these ideas can reach a market application much quicker and reach markets through by joining these marketplaces and these networks that are able to connect them to people and resources that they didn't know before. And what's interesting is that when I tried to join UNoodle, I was in my 5th year of my doctoral degree. I had everything done except for my thesis. And so I really wanted to become an entrepreneur. And I went to my mom, and she's a Korean immigrant, right, living in Argentina. We were the first generation to go to college. And so I go to my mom, and I tell her, I'm going to drop out of my PhD degree at Stanford, and I'm going to start a company. And she said, no, absolutely not, over my dead body. You know, we Koreans are very much into education, and it's one of the highest ways of advancing in society in our mindset. So I had to do something tricky. I went and showed her this statistic, a report that showed the average income of Google PhD dropouts compared to the average income of Google PhD graduates. What I didn't tell her is that that average included the income of the Google founders. So she saw a very big delta and said, follow your dreams, it's fine. Go and create your noodle company. So I couldn't really explain to her what my company did and all of these networks and innovation networks. And so I told her that we made ramen. And we actually created this poster and put it up on a Starbucks nearby. And when my mom came to visit, we would show her, this is my ramen company. I make noodles. So I got her blessing. Another network that we created was actually in response to a new trend. So sometimes markets tell you, well, there's a gap now. For example, in 2006, clean tech was a buzzword. Everybody was talking about innovation that could help with climate change and support renewables. However, the ecosystem in Silicon Valley was not ready for that. So many of these VC investor firms didn't have partners who were experts on clean tech. They didn't have the networks to get to the deals that were creating some of the new technologies for this sector. And so a bunch of us got together, volunteers, and created a platform called CleanTech Open. It was a combination of an accelerator with a competition. And over the years, we helped 1,000 companies raise more than $1 billion in funding. And what was interesting is that it was all very organic. One of the case studies that came out of that, excuse me, is Free the Seed. It's a company that was out of a lab in Malaysia, and the problem that they were trying to solve was that in many of these rice fields, you have people clearing the fields by burning, and they burn rice straw after they have their harvest, and this creates a tremendous amount of air pollution. So what these researchers did was transform that waste into new packaging materials. Sustainable packaging, green packaging. Through the CleanTech Open, they were able to go to Silicon Valley, and through that experience, they were able to raise some money and get their first clients and help about 30,000 farmers get extra income from this waste that now was generating value, and also obviously create benefits in terms of reducing the amount of air pollution that the community was facing. So this is an example of how these international and global collaborative networks can really help also create social impact. Now, we said that we're going to talk about capital and how investors also get together to pool their resources. One of the most famous examples of investor networks is the PayPal Mafia. Have you guys heard of the PayPal Mafia? Do you talk about it here? So the story of the PayPal Mafia is that some of the regional members of PayPal, that included people like Peter Thiel, the first investor in Facebook, Max Levchin, co-founder of PayPal, you had Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, you had Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla. All of them, in 2.5 years, were able to create PayPal and sell it to eBay for $1.5 billion. So now you had a bunch of 20-something-year-olds who became millionaires instantaneously overnight. So what did they do? Instead of going out and buying yachts, they decided to reinvest that capital into the new generation of startups. And they did that in collaboration by co-investing together and creating these knowledge networks that really taught the new generation how to create scalable businesses. And out of those investments, you see the list on the wall of the companies that were created. Tesla, SpaceX, Yelp, YouTube, Facebook, Kiva, which is a microfinance platform. So just 12 people, 13 people were able to create a lot of value and a lot of disruption in the field by just creating a network of co-investments. Another group that was similar was created out of Google. My friend Ella Gill was actually one of the founders of this Angels Network. They got together maybe 40 of the early people from Google who, after the IPO, they became quite wealthy, and they also started to invest together. So what's really exciting about this is that if you count just the 25 top investors out of that network, in just a very short time, they're able to invest together in 740 startups and create 330,000 jobs. That happened in a very short time, in a few years. So imagine, just the people in this room, you are more than 40. If you were to create this type of networks where you pool resources and invest together in the next generation, the potential of creating value and impact is limitless. And now, after Me Too, women are getting together and doing similar things as well. I know the topic of gender and technology, gender and startups is a tricky one everywhere, but especially in Silicon Valley, we're doing a really poor job. If you look at the amount of venture funding that goes into funding startups, only 2.2% of all the venture funding in the US goes to all-female teams. Very small number. In fact, as a group, they received less money than one company, Juul, the e-cigarette company in the US. They received $10 billion less than one company, the entire group of female founders in the US. So think about that. 91% of all the equity in startups in Silicon Valley belongs to men. 91%. And only 11% of all Silicon Valley investors are female. So these networks of women coming out of Facebook, they created a fund called F7. Out of Twitter, they created a group called #Angels. And out of Uber, they started to invest together. And not only on companies that will provide returns for them, but also companies that are working on problems that are affecting women. For example, Carrot is a company that helps women with fertility treatments. And they have done really well in changing also the rules of the game so that more women can access capital and other women can also learn how to invest. But I'm not going to let public officers and the public sector off the hook, because I think one of the most powerful things we can do with governments is when governments get together and share best practices. Because the implications of changing the law around entrepreneurship and lowering the barriers for people like you guys to take ideas from the lab to the market, governments have a very important role on that. And so with Startup Nations, which we co-founded in 2013, we brought a number of ministers and governments together, and we told them, you share. And not only sharing knowledge about policies, I want you guys to mentor a group of about 450 young entrepreneurs coming from 100 countries. We brought them together in one big room, and we made the ministers mentor the young people who in 3 days created companies. There was a big competition, and the winning company in 3 days had already generated revenue. So they had just met, created the idea, got mentorship from these government officials, and then were able to create value right away. So it can be a very fun process to do that. And now with the Global Entrepreneurship Network, we created an atlas of all of the policies that are being tested and experimented with around the world so that people can learn from the results of some of these policy experiments. Because the entrepreneurial mindset that we're talking about is not limited to creating startups or creating money. It can be applied to academics, researchers, and also policymakers. Okay, so what happens when this works? What is the holy grail of tech transfer? I have two examples for you. One very known one, Google. I told you about Sergey and Larry, the founders of Google. Their parents were actually both professors. Both of their fathers were professors in math and computer science. And when Sergey and Larry started to create the idea of a company, they had this new algorithm that had a PageRank process as part of the Digital Libraries Initiative. And in fact, they got some private money. I believe it was Paul Allen who put in a check of $100,000 to the research of these two students. And then they now had an algorithm that allowed search to happen for the new and upcoming internet, right? That in the 90s was happening. So they went to the tech transfer office, and they told Stanford's tech transfer office, I have this new idea. And they said, your algorithm is actually not even the best one we have at Stanford. And this is something that the officers from back then from the tech transfer office tell the story these days. In fact, we have two more that are better algorithms. Why should we patent yours instead of the other researchers that are working on similar things? And back then, Sergey and Larry said, because we are the only ones who want to start a billion-dollar company. So at age 23, 24, they knew the value of what they're working on, and that intention of creating a lot of value was instrumental for them to continue building Google, and we know the results today. In fact, they were actually one of the first participants of these meetups that were happening at Stanford back then. A new student group named BASIS was gathering engineers and scientists on Friday afternoons with beer and pizza, and people were just talking about new ideas and how to bring them to market. And out of all those conversations, Google was born. So I'm so pleased to see the impact of students who created Slush and how this became such an enormous thing, because those informal and casual networks end up creating ecosystems and communities. The other example was actually a professor of mine at MIT. His name is Robert Langer, and he's one of the most prolific inventors in history. He has 1,350 patents in terms of citations, 300,000 citations. He's the academic or researcher with the most number of citations in the world, 34 honorary degrees. He has created 400 companies out of his ideas and patents. But this is what's interesting about him. When you ask him how he got started, what happened at MIT is that his ideas were so cross-disciplinary and so applied in some sense that MIT didn't like it. And everybody expected him to fail, and nobody paid attention. And he said, not having attention on me because people assumed that this was not going to work allowed me to take tremendous risk and latitude on the things that I was trying. And that was really key. So sometimes when you face resistance, that could be a good sign that you may be able to be an underdog and create things against all odds. I'm talking about failures. This is my favorite example of failure in the history of technology. How many people have heard of General Magic as a company? Nobody, right? One person out of this whole crowd. Three. So General Magic was created during, remember when Steve Jobs departed Apple and a new CEO came, Scully? So there were a number of disgruntled original Macintosh engineers like Bill Atkinson and Andy Hertzfeld, and they were some of the original engineers in the computing history of Silicon Valley. And they said, screw this, we're going to go and start the next Apple. It's going to be called General Magic. And Mark Porat, who was the CEO, actually, he's a good friend of us, and he tells the story of how at that time, they drew the design of what we have today as the iPhone. So he has 30-year-old designs that look exactly the same to the user interface that we have today for the iPhone. So they had everything already figured out in terms of how it was going to work. And they created the first prototype of a smart device that was mobile, connected, that would have computing power, and they put the best engineers and a lot of money into this project. They were valued at almost $1 billion at some point. Everybody was talking about how this was the next Apple, and so it generated a ton of interest. But then they took the product to the market, and it failed. So the sign that it failed is when Mark said, we started to look at the buyers and the names of the buyers of the product. So the entire universe of people who bought a device, and people in the team could recognize all the names. So they're all family members and friends, right? So the product of General Magic, even though they had something that eventually became reality, failed. It was a massive, public, tragic failure. And for Mark, this even made him leave the world of technology into a totally different sector altogether. It cost him a marriage. He got divorced out of this. So it was really terrible, okay? So he says, for me and our team and our investors, this was undoubtedly, no doubt, a failure. But what happened? Some of the original team members of General Magic, including Tony Fadell, Pierre Omidyar, Andy Rubin, were actually junior engineers. They're not even top engineers in the company. They're junior engineers in the company. They took that know-how, and later in their careers, they created the iPod, iPhone, Android, and eBay. And eBay, as I told you, became the buyer of PayPal and creating that network. So sometimes these massive failures are very important elements of these ecosystems because they create the networks of the next generation of innovators. And so now when you look at the failures, think about what that may be adding to your ecosystem and your community. They are necessary elements of any healthy innovation ecosystem. And talking about failures, I have to be honest, one of the failures that was most painful to me personally, being from Argentina, is that we lost the World Cup in the last Soccer World Cup. And I've been thinking a lot about this and how innovation sometimes resembles this process of a World Cup. It's a sport, right, in some senses, and it is a team sport. So you look at Argentina, and it's a country with a superstar, like Messi, everybody knows him, everybody relies on him to do magic. And then you have France's national team, and they're drawing players from all over, man. Like, you can't even count the countries that are represented in those teams. And the diversity that you have in those teams truly make a difference when it comes to creating the winning streaks. So the networks had this role of providing access to diverse talent into your network that may not be represented just in Helsinki or just in Finland. They also have a way of creating cultural traits and expectations by creating these performance indicators that are acceptable for a certain society. It took some time, for example, for even MIT to accept that academics can take a leave of absence, go outside, do their startups, and come back. That took time. It didn't happen overnight. But now, if you're a student at MIT and you say, I want to take a break for 6 months to start a company, they say, good luck. Come back and donate some money. So I think, especially in Latin America, where I'm coming from, or in the Nordic countries, this cultural shift is happening, but slowly and gradually. And what's important is to continue striving for diversity and for cultural change. And since we're talking about culture, I want to say that talented people are everywhere, and you can't always make them come to you. So MIT, for example, created this really beautiful center for entrepreneurs. It had all the latest technologies, the whiteboards that you want, office space, internet and connectivity and conference rooms, everything. But you would see those spaces not often used. And then you go to a dorm room at 2 in the morning, Burton Connor, and then there is literally 20, 30 students working at 3 in the morning on a company. Dropbox was founded this way. And so the lesson here is that you have to go to where the talent is, and the talent could be outside of the university, or the talent could be outside of the country. And networks can be really good ways to leverage that. So Abraham Lincoln said that the best way to predict the future is to create the future. But I think just creating one future is not enough in today's world. The world is changing very rapidly, and the key trait for survival and for success is to be able to be resilient to that change, to be able to be versatile to all of the new trends that we see on a daily basis. And so I think of that, because I have small kids, as transformer robots. Instead of creating one version of a car or a robot, you try to create adaptability in both you as individuals and you as an organization. In fact, I teach at Stanford a class for undergrads. So I talk to a couple hundred 20-year-olds, millennials, and Generation Z students every year. And today, the source of the most amount of anxiety that I see in them is that they don't know what to choose. They say, I like this, but I don't know if in 10 years this career will exist. So how do I choose where to focus my energy and my time? And I say, just build a few versions of you. Study a few things. Don't be just an academic. Be an academic and an entrepreneur. Do enough things that you have a portfolio of identities that you can pull out whenever you see a changing environment. So they say, instead of building a car for a parking lot, build a car for a moving bridge. The environment is changing all the time. And when it comes to diversity, I think it's very important to think about your internal diversity as well. So consider the game of dominoes, right? When you have 2 tiles, but it's 2-dimensional, versus a dice that has 6 tiles. Which one has more stability and more ways to connect with other tiles? The 6-dimensional one or the 2-dimensional one, right? The 6-face dice or the 2-face domino. It is definitely the dice. And so building that versatility and multiple identities, I think, is crucial for universities. And for universities to get there, they have to experiment. And they have to not only play within the academic world, but also branch out and test some of these experiments in the market to see where the main applications and the most of the impact could happen. And that's only done by doing iteration with small and quick and real-time experiments. So my recommendation is that if you want to predict the future, you create many futures, not just one future for yourself. And so today I'm still building networks with my fund, Kalei Ventures, which is a venture fund. We connect underdog ecosystems with each other, for example, Latin America and Korea. And then we connect the best companies out of those ecosystems to research-rich clusters like Silicon Valley or London. So that's what I do in my day job today. And also I'm part of the faculty at Thunderbird, which is a school of management. And there what we're trying to do is actually bring together a group that was traditionally not networked to invest in startups, family offices and family businesses, and we work with them in providing the training and the capacity to be able to be involved in these innovation processes happening outside of their core family businesses. And so that's the end of my presentation, but if we have time, we can have a few more minutes. Do we have time?
We have time for a few questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, nobody sat down, so it's a good sign.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and I feel your pain with Argentina not managing in the World Cup. I live there myself, so I bleed for that country, but that's another discussion. If you'd like to recap a little bit, how would you advise the people here how to best build a functioning network or an ecosystem?
Great question. So I think the network has always had to have a purpose. And it could be casual, and it could be evolving that purpose, but you have to be fulfilling a gap that you observe in the system, right? So there has to be a certain goal for the network, but also you have to seed the network with the right people. Critical people in any network are the connectors, are people who are able to translate Finnish to Latin American in terms of culture. And those people are very crucial in having as members of this network early on, so you can build and scale up on that.
Well, do you see ever that a network could turn dysfunctional, actually? Turn against the people who are using it?
Yes, the networks can be very powerful, and we know this because criminal networks are very, very effective in some ways. And so definitely there are functional networks with a criminal purpose, and also there are many networks that without the right oil in the system, they can become dysfunctional very quickly. And that's where I do feel like having members with a lot of centrality, we call it in network theory, is very, very important.
Well, when do you know when a network is sort of ready to die out, that it's not really functional and giving to the people anymore? When should you just put it into rest?
Like any living system, when the dynamic nature of the interactions stop happening, and you see some stalling both in terms of growth as well as in terms of the exchanges and transactions that happen in that network, you see that maybe something is happening. Maybe that is the maximum size of the network, but perhaps there's value that is missing. When members of the network start noticing that you're not getting the value that you expect, that's when it starts decaying. Just like it's happening to Facebook. I'm predicting, at some point Facebook is not gonna give the value to the new generations that it gave to our generation, and then that's going to be the end of it.
It's quite interesting because we live in a very individualistic world these days, but at the same time, all these networks connect people. So which one is pulling more, connecting or being an individual by yourself?
I have a funny story about that because, so I'm married to a Nordic, and I'm from Latin America. I'm Korean, right? In Asia and Latin America, societies are very close-knit, where we depend on each other to survive because the government or the ecosystem cannot give us the resources we need to survive. But my husband comes from Denmark, and it's a much more individualistic and independent society, and we clash about this all the time. So I'll give you a very funny example. He says, we should have comforters for the bed that are separate, because that optimizes the level of warmth you have at night. And I'm thinking, no, that is antithetic to a marriage. You have to have one comforter, and you share, and you snuggle with each other, and if I get more one day, you get more next day, right? And that's sort of a philosophy. And so we're still debating on whether we buy individual comforters or not. Well, that's a funny story, but I think it's actually a very interesting tension that exists between that drive for independence and individualism and the need to have those networks that help you access resources. So I think what happens is that those networks are able to allow you access types of resources and knowledge that within your individual networks you can't. So there's a point that your family and friends are not enough to get you a job. Then you have to expand. There are times when your country is not enough, and then you go beyond that. And that is what's happening even in countries that are very resource-rich, because, for example, Korea is an aging population. Now everybody there is much older than, for example, the average population in Latin America. People are not having children in Korea, so it's under 1 kid per family. So you can imagine that eventually the country will not be able to sustain itself in terms of the labor market and the social security. So then you have to expand outside. So I do think that it's very important to not create interdependencies that are paralyzing, but certainly I'm a strong believer of networks that make the pie bigger instead of having to dilute the value that you can offer to the community.
We're exactly at the same point here in Finland. We're not having enough children, and we need to look outside, but that's a very hot political discussion. Let's not get into that, but let's give Rebeca a warm hand.
Thank you.